Hello viewers, you are welcome to Eko Learners Support for WAEC and NECO candidates. Today, we'll be looking at economics. And in this session, we'll be considering the concept of supply.
Eko Learners Support, a support program of the Lagos State Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education for WAEC and NECO candidates.
Under this concept, we'll start by defining what our learning objectives are. So at the end of this session, each student will be able to first explain what supply means. A student would also be able to distinguish between individual supply and market supply, and then be able to draw supply schedules and curves. So, defining supply, we say it is the quantity of a commodity that a producer or a seller is willing to offer for sale, willing and able, of course, to offer for sale at a given price and at a particular time. What does this mean? Now, to come to the theory of supply or the concept of supply, it is expected that we have learned the theory of demand, which stipulates that a consumer requests or consumes or buys, purchases a given quantity of a product or commodity or service at a given price and at a given time. For the consumer or for the buyer to be able to have access to the product they intend to purchase, this product is expected to be available, to be made available in the market. The process of making this product available in the market is supply. But critically, a producer or a supplier must not just have the products available for sale, he must also be willing to make those products available in the market. Now, supply essentially is different from the stock of products that is available with the producer or with the seller. Like I said, it is that part of the total stock that the producer or the seller is willing to offer and is able to offer. So it is important to understand that willingness and ability are critical to the concept of supply. Total stock on its own is what is available perhaps in the warehouse, whereas supply is that part of that total stock that the seller brings to the market because he's willing to and because he has the ability to do so. And this supply, which is made available willingly and with ability, is referred to as effective supply. Supply moves in the same direction as price. This simply means that as price rises, supply, the quantity supplied also increases. So there is a positive movement or a positive correlation between the price of a commodity and the quantity of that commodity that is offered for sale. And this is referred to as the second law of demand and supply. So supply, it says that the higher the quantity of a commodity that is produced or that the producer or seller is willing to offer for sale, the higher the price of the commodity, the higher the quantity that the producer is willing to offer for sale. The lower the price, also, the lower the quantity of the product that the producer or seller is willing to offer for sale. The law of supply, which we have actually just stated, says that all other things being equal, meaning that other factors remaining unchanged, the higher the price, the higher the quantity of a commodity that will be supplied to the market. And the reverse is also true, meaning that the lower the price, the lower the quantity that is offered for sale. And like we said, this is the second law of supply. And that takes us to how we represent quantity supplied in relation to price. Or in other words, how we express the second law of supply. This is done in a supply schedule. A supply schedule is basically a table showing the relationships between the various prices of a commodity and the corresponding quantities of that commodity that is supplied to the market. So we say it is a tabular representation of the various prices and quantities of a commodity that sellers are willing and able to offer for sale at a given price, at a given point in time. Note that there has to be willingness and ability. There are two types of supply schedule, or a supply schedule has two types. There is the individual supply schedule, which is the supply schedule of a single firm or a single seller or producer. And then we have the market supply schedule, which is the supply schedule of the industry or the collection of all players in the market who are willing and able to bring the product for sale. The supply schedule of an individual simply shows, like we said, the corresponding prices and quantities supplied to the market at a given point in time, all other things being equal. And the market schedule combines the various prices and the corresponding quantities that the different or various sellers are willing and able to offer for sale in the market. So in the individual supply schedule we have here, we are looking at prices of cement and the quantities that a particular seller offers for sale in the market. The prices are given in naira, so we have that at 2,500 naira, this individual seller is willing to bring 500 into the market. At 4,000 naira, this individual seller is willing and able to offer 850 bags. And at 6,500 naira, this individual is willing and able to make 1,500 bags available for sale in the market, showing very clearly the law of supply, which is showing that as the price of a bag of cement is increasing, the quantity that is offered for sale in the market also increases. Now, for the market supply schedule, what we have are three different sellers. Alhaji Musa is willing to supply 500 bags at 2,500 naira, whereas Mr. Obi is willing to supply 350 bags at the same price. And Eldaoluwani Fishe is willing to supply 220 bags at that price. At the end of the day, we have what is called the total quantity supplied, which is basically the summation of the individual quantities supplied by the different sellers. So, the total quantity supplied to the market is a summation of what is supplied by each seller that offers their product to the market for sale. So as pointed out, total quantity supplied in the market supply schedule is the sum of individual quantities offered for sale by each seller. Having discussed the supply schedule, we'll now go on to talk about the supply curve. The supply curve is derived from the supply schedule, and it is the graphical representation of the various quantities of the commodity that sellers are willing to offer for sale in the market at given prices and at a given point in time. Just like in the supply schedule, we also have an individual supply curve and a market supply curve. So using the information from our individual supply schedule, we draw up an individual supply curve, which shows that at these prices, these quantities are offered for sale in the market by the individual seller. So, for example, at 4,000 naira, about 850 bags of cement are offered for sale. And at 6,500 naira, about 1,500 bags are offered for sale. On the other hand, for the market supply schedule, we have to sum up all the quantities that are offered for sale at those various prices to draw up our market supply schedule. So, using the information from the previous table as well for market supply schedule, we arrive at this supply curve, which is a market supply curve, which sums up all the quantities that are supplied to the market by all the sellers put together at these different prices. So at 4,000 naira per bag, about 2,150, which is the summation of what each individual seller brought to the market. And then at 6,500 naira, had about 4,100 bags offered for sale in the market. Having gone through the concept of supply, defining supply, looking at the law of supply, looking at the table, which is the supply, the tabular representation of the different quantities and prices offered for sale, which is referred to as the supply schedule, and from thence drawing supply curves for both the individual supplier and for the market or industry as a whole, we have these questions as review. The first question says, what is a supply schedule? The B part of it says, using an example, show how a market supply schedule is obtained from individual supply schedules. And then the question number 2 says, with the aid of illustrations, differentiate between a supply schedule and a supply curve. Before I answer this question, I'll give you some time, say 30 seconds, to answer these questions on your own, and then I'll be right back to do the review with you. So welcome back. A supply schedule, like we said, is a table representing the different quantities of a commodity that is offered for sale in the market at different prices and at a given point in time. The important word there is table. It is a tabular representation. A supply schedule must therefore be presented as a table. I hope you get that. Now, the second part says, using an example, show how a market supply schedule is obtained from individual supply schedules. So, we can use the example that we had in the lesson, where we had bags of cement offered for sale in the market by different suppliers. We can also have any other product offered for sale. What is important is that we have a table showing 2 or more suppliers and then sum up their the total quantities that they offered for sale at given prices to arrive at the total supply schedule. So, what we do is to have a table showing prices and quantity. So at different prices and 5 naira, we can say we have 3 different suppliers, A, B, and C. And that each of these suppliers offered for sale different quantities. 2, as the price goes higher, 4, 6, 8, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 15, 30, 45, 60, 75. And then total quantity is now the sum of this. 20 plus 2, which is 22, plus 15 to give 37. So total is 37. So these are individual supplies given the market supply schedule. 4 plus 30 is 34, plus another 30 is 64. 46 plus 45 will give 91. And then this gives 118. And lastly, we have 85 plus 60 is 145. So this gives a market supply schedule. We can go ahead to derive a market curve from this if the question goes on to ask us to do that. What is critical is that we show the individual schedules and then the market, which is essentially a summation of the individuals. The second question now says, with the aid of illustrations, differentiate between a supply schedule and a supply curve. To do this, we simply derive, for me, I would just use an individual supply schedule to show the relationship between price and quantity and then translate that into a curve. What is important to note is that our curve, based on the second law of supply, should have a positive relationship between price and quantity, showing that as prices increase, quantities offered for sale in the market also increase. The higher the price, the higher the quantity, and the lower the price, the lower the quantity. So we have our supply schedule, which is the table, and then translate that to a curve. And in drawing up our curve, it is important to have price on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal axis. And we must always indicate the origin. Now, some questions will ask you to use a graph to do this representation or to draw the curve. Should that come up, it is important to take note that you must be very careful in choosing your axis or the points on your axis. So if you are saying, for instance, you look at your information and what you have in quantity is from 20 to 100. So you must use the same size or distance on the axis to represent the same values. So if you start from 0 to 20, and this is 1 centimeter, it means the next 1 centimeter must be 40, the next 1 centimeter will be 60, and so on. The same thing you do on the price axis, maybe 1 naira, 2 naira, 3 naira, and 4 naira. And your supply curve must be upward sloping, showing, and you must label it to show it is a supply curve and showing the positive relationship between price and quantity.
Acing your WAEC and NECO examinations has been made easy by the Lagos State Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education with the Eko Learners Support for WAEC and NECO Candidates television program. Join seasoned teachers as they take you through these core subjects. targeting the exact syllabus of WAEC and NECO. Watch Eko Learners Support for WAEC and NECO candidates through these social media platforms to access more educational content and give their feedback. Eko Learners Support for WAEC and NECO candidates. Pass your examinations with flying colors.
So we have come to the end of this session. If you have observations or comments, kindly send them to our social media handles that will be displayed on the screen. Thank you. Have a good day.